So this is the Evolving Sounds webinar. I think it's going to be very interesting. We'll start in just a moment. First, though, we're going to start with a little question for you. Very easy question while a few more people come into the webinar. What's your favorite music? What music do you like the most? Please put your comment in the chat box. Okay, excellent. We're seeing some very good responses here, good variety of different things. Okay, very good. Yeah, a bit of everything we have here. Some in English, some in Spanish, perhaps other languages. Many different types of music. Okay, great. So we're going to start this little webinar. Just get your brain moving with a little test. Are you ready for a test? Be careful because we have the test in just one moment. First, though, question for you. Why am I talking about music? Why is the Externado University having an English webinar about music? Well, music for me is very, very important. I think music is a vital part of my life. I cannot imagine my life without music. And also, music is more than music. Music is feelings, music is history, music is important movements in society. Music connects us to different places, to different times. And music is about stories. So there's a lot of interesting stories connected to music that we're going to see. First, though, as I promised, let's look at the test. So I'm going to give you some names of famous musicians, people connected to music, and please use the chat box. Do you recognize the names? What music do you associate these people with? What type of music? Okay, so please put your answers in the chat box. What music do you associate these people with? Okay, so some interesting answers. Some people are saying reggae, very good, yeah. Rock, Okay, very good. Gabriella, excellent. Okay, so if you're not sure, I'm going to help you here. I'm going to show you first the pictures of these different. Look at the pictures, and if you're not sure, try to imagine what music do you think they play. Okay, so we've got some really interesting ideas coming. I can see many of you know a lot about music already, which is excellent. A lot of great knowledge of music. So let's just check some of these different genres of music. Let's see what we have. So, as you can see, we have a lot of different types of music. We have a lot of different time periods. And here, this is to give you an idea, the sorts of things we'll be talking about today, of many, many different types of music, particularly in the United States and the United Kingdom, and looking at many of the different things that these represent. So, first of all, the origins of music. Have you ever thought about where music comes from? When people started playing music? Well, the real answer, no one really knows exactly when, but people say that music was something as humans we developed before language. So before we spoke, before we could communicate with words, we communicated with music. So it's something very, very human. It's part of course, the first music perhaps came from nature, came from listening to the sounds of the natural world and then trying to emulate these sounds, trying to make our own music, our own sounds. So there's been a lot of changes in the history of music. If we go back years and years and years and years, we can see many different changes, many different types of music, different instruments, for example. But when we think about modern music or music in the way we think of it today, perhaps we start with the classical period. So can someone tell me who's in the picture here? Yep, that's right. Laura, very good. So, almost David. Yes, so here, very good. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So, very, very interesting life. We're not looking at classical music today, but a very interesting individual anyway. He died when he was just 35 years old, but he composed over 600 pieces of music. So very, very interesting person. So the focus today really though is on the 20th and the 21st centuries. And we're going to start with a man called Robert Johnson. Has anyone heard of Robert Johnson? No, no idea. Well, Robert Johnson, many people say, was one of the greatest musicians, particularly the greatest blues musicians who ever lived. He was from the Mississippi Delta region, which was a very, very poor region, a very agricultural region. And this area had a lot of slaves. So this region was where blues first came from in the early 20th century, coming from a lot of the rhythms and the traditions that Afro-Americans brought to the United States, combined with the very poor, the very difficult situations they were living in. So blues was in many ways their expression of this situation. Now, Robert Johnson was a very interesting person. Now, if you look here, I say the Robert Johnson myth. The reason I say this is there's a great story about Robert Johnson. People say that he was born in the Mississippi Delta as a young man. He loved music, he loved to play the guitar, and he said, I want to be one of the greatest musicians ever. But, well, he was good, but not great. Someone told him, hey, if you want to be great, I know the place. You need to go to a crossroads in the middle of the night, find the devil, give him your soul, and he will give you this amazing ability. So people say Robert Johnson was one of the greatest musicians ever because he sold his soul to the devil. He made this contract in return for being an amazing musician. So in today's webinar, we're going to be looking at the lives of a few of these different people, and we're going to be listening to a few of the songs. So I've actually created a special playlist for today, which you can find, and the address is here on the screen. I'm going to put the address here. The chat box, so please open the web page. You'll find here a list of the different songs. So please, first, just the first song, just the Robert Johnson song here, Crossroads. This is his story, going to the crossroads and making this contract with the devil. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes just now, please. Listen to the song, see what you think, and I'll see you back in 3 minutes. Okay, so we're going to continue now. So we have a lot of different music and a lot of different people to talk about today. So let's continue. So this was, as I said, 1936, Robert Johnson recorded this incredible song, amazing voice. Did he make a deal with the devil? Well, you have to decide. Of course, after this, 1939, World War II started, and well, United States entered in 1941. So not a lot of music in this time, but after the Second World War, there was a very interesting period. So 1950s in the United States, we saw this new prosperity, a lot more money around, and particularly young people with money. So this was not something that was true before this, but 1950s, we started to see young people with money, young people wanting to spend their money and to do different activities. As you can see in the third picture here, for example, collecting music was a big thing. So, of course, many businesses wanted to make money from these young people and create interesting commerce that these people would be interested in. Another big thing at this time, of course, not only music, but also television, really important. So this, if you look here, was a 1950s television, little wooden box, not a widescreen TV, not HD, but maybe the family just had one if they had some money. And at this time, of course, very, very big star of the 1950s, we had Elvis Presley. So Elvis Presley, incredibly famous singer, again, came from a very poor background, but in the end, he was so rich that he had more money than he could spend. There were many stories about him going to a restaurant. He had a very nice meal and he told the waiter, "Hey, thank you for the service. Outside, there's my limousine. Please take the limousine. It's yours." Because he was very, very rich. If you ever have the chance to visit his house in Memphis, very interesting place to visit. Now, Elvis and television was also very interesting. So in Colombia, we know that Shakira, for example, wonderful dancer. So hips don't lie, as Shakira says. Elvis was called, some people called him Elvis the pelvis because of the way he danced. Now, for today, in the 50s, this was TV. So when he was on television, they actually decided to just use the camera just on the top of his body so they didn't show his hips. So Elvis the pelvis was not shown on television, only the top part of Elvis. So we're going to have a little listen now to some Elvis. Again, please, we have the playlist. Please follow the link in the chat box. And we're going to look at one of Elvis's first and best known songs. This is Blue Suede Shoes. So very good question in the chat box. Is he really playing the guitar? Well, again, that's for you to decide. But Elvis was, of course, very, very popular as a singer, as an actor, very, very interesting personality. Of course, the way he finished up at the end of his life was very different, a lot heavier. Okay, so at the same, around the same time, of course, we had all this kind of youth explosion of music, but we also saw a lot of sophistication of music. So we have here Miles Davis. Some of you recognized him from the first activity. Quite possibly the most amazing jazz musician in history. So people, some people called him the Picasso of jazz. He was an amazing musician who really reinvented the idea of jazz. So jazz had existed since the beginning of the 20th century, but in Miles Davis's life and career, he reinvented the idea of jazz in many ways. So we're not going to listen to the video just now, but on the playlist that I gave you, you can find a complete album, possibly the best. Some people say the best jazz album ever, Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. So you can enjoy that later. I created the playlist, so you can always check later and listen to these things. So around this time, of course, there were a lot of different things happening in music. So when we look at the 1960s, we can see the British invasion. So a lot of bands were very important in the British invasion. Which band was the most important in the British invasion, 1960s? Any ideas? Excellent, yes. Many of you are commenting there in the chat box. Very good. Yep, the Beatles, absolutely. Yep, and as Felipe mentions as well at the same time, of course, when we talk about the Beatles, we usually have to talk as well about the Rolling Stones. Very, very important. Of course, though, when we say the British invasion, so this was in the 1960s, there were many other bands as well here, so bands like the Kinks or the Animals. This was a little before Pink Floyd and Queen, but 1960s, there were some really important British bands. So particularly, of course, thinking about the Beatles. So I don't know if you've heard of this before, but there was a phenomenon called Beatlemania. People went crazy about the Beatles. So particularly young women had to be controlled by police because they loved these people so much. Yeah, there was panic in the streets caused by the Beatles. The Beatles, again, very important as musicians, but also as actors. So here, their film Hard Day's Night, very, very popular, very interesting, because here the Beatles played themselves. So it was a Beatles film about the Beatles. So possibly you think, oh, well, the Beatles, yeah, obviously, yeah, they were very popular. So not always, not always. So here, A Hard Day's Night, for example, was from 1964. If we look just 2 years before that, 1962, the Beatles had an audition with a record label called Decca. So possibly you think, oh, it's the Beatles, of course. They're popular, they're successful. And what happened? Decca said, no, you go away. They said, guitar groups are on the way out. The Beatles have no future in show business. So you can imagine a few years later, the people who said no money now, we're going to have a loo. Go to the oh no, I'm apparently there's a problem with that particular audio. No problem. I'll fix that later. So you can listen to that later. But it was working earlier today. The mystery of the internet. Anyway, let's continue. So around this time, of course, lots of different things were happening. So as we saw a moment ago with Miles Davis, a lot of interesting things with African American musicians, but also quite a difficult time for a lot of African Americans. So as some of you said in the first activity, Aretha Franklin, yes, also connected to gospel and R&B and soul. So here, particularly, Aretha Franklin had a song called Respect, which it wasn't written by her, but she made it particularly famous and a great anthem for the protests in the 1960s and for people looking for civil rights. So Aretha Franklin really believed in helping people. She really tried to change the world and have more acceptance for people of color. And she gave money to these people. And as I say, her song, Respect, well, let's listen to it now. So please follow the link in the chat box. Once again, so 1967, Aretha Franklin and Respect. está fallando el internet. Tengo que abrir esta puerta. Qué pena. So you can see here that a very interesting thing is that this song works on different levels. If you just look at the words, maybe you think, oh, she's singing about a boyfriend or a husband, but at the same time, it's a song about respect in society and respect and civil rights. So, of course, talking about the 1960s, we need to talk about another very big social movement, which was psychedelia and the hippies in the 1960s. So lots of really interesting things happening here. The movement of peace and love, lots of really interesting psychedelic music. So bands like the Grateful Dead, really interesting here. Jimi Hendrix, very interesting. So there's a Jimi Hendrix song on the playlist. The Doors, that's right. Janis Joplin, absolutely. And of course, a lot of these people played at the biggest, possibly the most important music festival ever, which was Woodstock. As the famous story goes, the famous saying, people say, well, if you remember going to Woodstock, you weren't there. But very, very big event, 3-day event with 400,000 people and a lot of very good music. And continuing then to the 1970s, we saw a few changes here. So here, the advent of glam rock, which again, like the hippies, very colorful, but with a few changes. So carrying on the liberty of the 1960s, the hippie movement, this type of rock was very androgynous. David Bowie, of course, here, clothes that are not exactly masculine in the most traditional way. So very interesting period, a time, of course, in the 1970s, again, of challenging stereotypes, of rebelling. Another great type of rebellion happening in the 1970s was the creation of reggae. So coming from Jamaica, definitely the best well-known, we have Mr. Bob Marley, representative of reggae and representative of the Rastafari religion. So this was a religion that was created in the 1930s in Jamaica, but very much popularized by reggae. So we're going to listen just now to one of Bob Marley's songs, Bob Marley and the Wailers. So please, once again, go to the playlist, have a listen to the song. Please tell me when you're ready to continue. Okay, so I know very popular song, very popular artist there. Of course, Get Up, Stand Up, this idea of fighting for your rights, this idea of protest. So as David says here, yeah, definitely a kind of a hymn, an anthem for rights. Another group of people who were fighting in a different way in the 1970s were the punks. So there's a lot of debate whether this really first appeared in the United States or the United Kingdom, but a lot of very interesting bands. Again, a whole sense of style, of clothes, of culture, fighting against the stereotypes, fighting against, you know, the traditional establishment. So here, for example, we have the Ramones, we have Patti Smith, and we have the Sex Pistols. So punk, of course, still a very influential genre that's changed in a lot of ways. So as Julian says here, they tried to challenge the status quo, definitely. The problem was, of course, that this was in the 1970s, and the 1970s was often a time of excess. So they tried to challenge the status quo, but often they were very, they used a lot of alcohol and used a lot of drugs, which is one reason why in the 1980s, the straight edge movement appeared. So here, this was the evolution of hardcore punk, and people who enjoyed punk music, but did not drink, did not use drugs. They were very believed in this real idea of purity. And again, they were challenging the idea of the punks from the 1970s. At the same time, of course, the rise of metal. So a lot of really big bands around the time. So there was Black Sabbath from a little earlier, but then kind of the more kind of 80s metal style appeared with Metallica and Iron Maiden, for example. Both had albums in the early 80s. It's wonderful long hair. Looks like a lot of us at the moment in quarantine. And often quite a sort of aggressive style. So this was happening in one way. So again, challenging the status quo, challenging the establishment. Another group of people who were doing this were the hip hop artists. So here, for example, we have Public Enemy. So these were from New York, where hip hop originated, well, hip hop specifically in the Bronx. And it was a very urban style of music. Again, these people were activists. They tried to challenge people's perception, in this case, of life for African Americans in the 20th century. They had a song, for example, called 911 is a joke, about how if you're black and you call the police won't come. So very interesting group that in their own way were challenging the idea of modern society. We then have, in the 1990s, a bit more guitar. So we could see really important alternative bands like Pixies or like Sonic Youth from the late 1980s. But it was really from 1991 when the big grunge band appeared, Nirvana. And along with them, other grunge bands like Pearl Jam, and then continuing to more alternative rock, Smashing Pumpkins as well. Yep. So as Julian says in the chat, yes, also Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, very good, really interesting grunge bands. But this was a real change from 1980s rock, because 1980s rock was all about, you know, your elegant style and you were extravagant. Grunge was, you know, wearing these very dark clothes or old clothes, and it was a very big change in the idea of rock. So yeah, I think a very interesting comment from Julian in the chat box. It was, yeah, it was more introspective, that's true. So Kurt Cobain, for example, suffered greatly from depression, and there was definitely a big change in the things that they talked about as well. So we could see then, moving on from this, a very different style of music coming from, particularly from London, in the early 21st century. So grime was a type of rap music. So we can see people like Ms. Dynamite, people like Dizzy Rascal, who again were continuing this idea of rap, this idea of changing the type of music. If you listen particularly to some of Dizzy Rascal songs, it's really the rhythms they use, particularly for an old man like me, is very different to what I expect in music. Yeah, that's true. Maria Jose says in the chat, similar to dancehall. Yeah, that was definitely a very big influence for them. Of course, combined with a lot of kind of electronic influences, a lot of different sounds. So moving on, and the decade that's just gone. So one big change, I think, definitely in 2010 was how available it was, how easy it was to get music. So particularly, we can see that things like Spotify were much easier to use. Many more people had smartphones. It was very easy to get hold of these different types of music. And here, because of this, many different things were popular. So we could see, you know, yep, that's right, Laura, Deezer as well. There's a lot of these different things. So we can see a lot of commercial music. So for many people, Ed Sheeran was the artist of the decade. Some people love him, some people don't, but definitely very, very popular. Beyonce, of course. These people, there was a real rise in the popularity of pop music and the global pop market, particularly. Julian says in the chat, yeah, about globalization. Very, very true. So we can see, for example, the rising popularity of things like K-pop. So things like BTS found a global market. Now we can find, you know, people all over the world, you know, people in Colombia, people in Australia, people in the middle of Africa, maybe, who listen to BTS and say, yeah, yeah, great music. At the same time, of course, music was easier to get, but in many ways also easier to produce. Lady has commented to me, she's got exactly the right idea. Excellent. Yes, Billie Eilish. So I don't know if you know this, Billie Eilish's album was recorded in her house. She used very cheap equipment, but of course, you know, perfectly professional for what she needs. So at the moment, of course, perhaps possibly very good for us in quarantine. If you want to make the new greatest album in the world, maybe you can do that from your house. So 2020 has only just started. at the moment. There's not a lot of concerts happening, but there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of things that can happen. So where are things going to go for music? Do you know? I think it's going to be interesting to find out. So as you can see on the playlist, I'm going to put it there again. I've left you a series of different things to listen to. You can consider that your homework if you want. Go and listen to these different things if you don't know them. I hope you enjoy them. I'd like to ask you if you have any particular questions, comments, ideas. Please, you can use the chat box. Please send your message to panelistas y participantes, or if you want to use your microphone, that's okay as well. So please, please tell me. Any questions, comments, or ideas? Okay, so a few comments here in the chat box here. Yeah, music, like art, every kind of art, a reflection of context, ideas of society. Definitely, lots of different things happening. If you say, yeah, good subject, well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to hear perhaps about a specific type of music or a specific period, then please tell me, and I'll be very happy to maybe organize a new webinar, a more specific webinar in the future. I know today we've been looking at many different things. Nicole suggests, excellent idea, Nicole. Please use the chat box. Recommend a song to listen to. What song do you recommend for the other people today? Lorena says maybe reggaeton. No, definitely. I think reggaeton, of course, very interesting tendency as well. We can see here starting in Latin America, or particularly Puerto Rico, and then spreading now to where people in United States or England listen to reggaeton, particularly, of course, say it's a fitness class, very popular music to listen to when you do exercise. Laura asks if the video will be uploaded somewhere. Yes, Laura, I'm recording this, and I will send you an email a little later with the video and also the PowerPoint presentation. So of course, if you have any, Laura says 21 pilots. Wow, yep, okay, very good. Please, if you're recommending songs, make sure you send it to panelistas y participantes, so we can all see your ideas. Okay. So if you have anything else to say, then please tell me. If not, then thank you very much for being here today. Please continue to enjoy music in English, in Spanish, in every language, because music is life, and life is rhythm, and there's always more music to discover. Okay, so it's been wonderful to share this time with you today. Thank you very much, and have an excellent evening. Okay, stay safe. Goodbye.